broken heart, you see. I'm not really here to talk about learning, because it's absolutely shattered in pieces. And I try every night with glue and bits of string to piece it back together again, but it doesn't always work. And my heart's broken because I always dream of utopia. Every night I dream of utopia, and I always have done. But one of the things Pete and I discussed is that we're from different generations. So to my generation, I've never really known another world other than this. And the world that we know, anybody born from the 80s onwards, is a world dominated by capital, by capitalism, by this absolute quest for money and this yearn for money and greed for money. And I've never known a world that doesn't have massive supermarkets, that doesn't have MTV, 24-hour television, credit cards, buy this, buy that, do this, do that. Something that Adam Curtis called the century of self. And this is the world that I was born into and the world that I had to grow up in. So it's a very different world. I envy people who are much older than me, people who were born in the 60s or in the 70s, and they had that sense of revolution and that sense of possibility, because we didn't have that sense of possibility. And sometimes when people talk about us and our generation, they call us the MTV generation or the PlayStation generation or this overprivileged generation that doesn't seem to want to do anything. And this is what breaks my heart. And this started when I was a little boy, and I was at school, and then Margaret Thatcher took my milk. That's what she did. And I didn't understand why she took the milk away from me, and it made me so sad. And I loved my teacher so much at school, and then they gave us the national curriculum, and all of that lovely stuff that I used to love going to school for, all the drawing and the writing, the creativity, that all went out the window. And I remember one day we got these little workbooks, and we suddenly had to work our way through these workbooks. And all of this lovely stuff that I used to love going to school for was suddenly all taken away. And that's why my heart is so broken. And it's still broken now, because as a teacher, I have to stand there every day, and I have to look at these young people who are in debt now for, I think, £22,000, so they can get an education, so they can try to help themselves in life. And it really does pain me to think that my salary comes from the debt of young people and the hard work of young people, because things seem so accessible and so out of reach. So that's why I'm here today. I hope someone's got tissues before I start crying, actually. But another thing that I think I can say about our generation is that we're not the children of Thatcher, we're not the children of MTV, and we're not this wasted generation. We're the children of the Matrix. Because the one thing that we do have is the internet. And I think that's something that Pete touched upon, and something that's central to COOCs, is we've always had this technology that allows us to connect with everybody else in the world. This is a picture from Anonymous, which kind of fits in, because we are legion and we are many, if anybody gets the pun there. But the key thing about the internet for me is because I was a really naughty boy when I was younger. I don't mind admitting that. I went to 2 schools because one school wanted to get rid of me. And then when I went to the second school, they put me in isolation because I wasn't allowed in the class with other people. But in isolation, they put me in the library. So when I was in the library, all I used to do was read and read and read. And around that time as well, we got a computer in the library, which was hooked up to the internet. So I started surfing the internet, and I started learning about everything. And I discovered philosophy, which is something I'll move on to afterwards. Philosophy, history, language. I discovered politics. And when I was about 16, I discovered Che Guevara. And I wanted nothing more than to be just like Che Guevara. And I thought, right, when I get a little older, what we're going to do, we're going to storm Westminster, a bit like V for Vendetta. That's what we're going to do. We're going to build this revolutionary army. We're going to storm Westminster. We're going to take Parliament, and we're going to build this great utopia. Sadly, that never happened. I think my revolutionary army consisted of about 12 people. They were all up for storming Westminster, but I couldn't quite get the big army that I really wanted to get. But the thing about the internet, I think, is something, again, that's part of COOCs, the community, which is in COOCs, is the internet is a global community. And it's a bit of a used word to say it's a global community, but it does connect us all together. And that's what society is. That's what our entire world is. It's something really peculiar. All society is connections between people. There is nothing else. There's no legal system. There's no government. None of these things actually exist. They're all abstractions. None of it is actually tangible. The only thing that's tangible are people and the way that people connect together. That's what the internet does. That's what a community is, or what a community should be. And I think that's what COOC is. I think that's the philosophy and the ethos of COOCs. But it's not so much about teachers having that top-down model and expressing themselves to people and telling them how wise they are and how wonderful they are. It's about bringing people together, and it's about creating dialogue and creating discourse amongst communities and amongst groups of people, which is a wonderful thing. And for me now, as I said before, the revolution might have been storming Parliament, maybe with Molotovs and AK-47. That's how I dreamed when I was 18. But now the revolution isn't about that. The revolution's about people and connecting with people. And that's my agenda as a teacher now, really. My agenda isn't to get high stats and retention statistics and 85% this, that or the other. All my agenda is if I can touch one single person in every single year group, change the way they think of themselves, change the way that they engage with the world, then my job's done. That's absolutely fantastic. And maybe one day I'll get sacked if all my statistics drop to 40% and nobody cares anymore. But personally for me, I'll be quite happy. I'll beg on the street or try to play a guitar or a drum or something. It'll be perfectly fine for me. So one of the things I've done on COOCs is something I've always wanted to do, and I've still not finished it, sadly, is set up a course on philosophy. And philosophy to me is really important because it's not the elitist discipline that sometimes people think it is. It's not this idea of sitting around and contemplating the meaning of life. You certainly don't have to go to Oxford or Cambridge to grasp the principles of philosophy. It's actually one of the most ancient of all human disciplines. It goes back thousands and thousands of years. And it parallels with what Pete said, that the whole idea of COOCs, the whole idea of community, the whole idea of learning is incredibly ancient. Because philosophy, philosophos, actually means love of wisdom. That's all it means. The love of wisdom, the love of learning, the love of understanding and trying to test and play with the world. And there's an interesting story to show how ancient this kind of idea is. There was a Pete, probably about 300 BC, and maybe had a purple jacket and a funny Willy Wonka hat. But the Pete of old of ancient Greece was called Diogenes of Sinope, and he was a contemporary of Plato. I'm sure everybody's heard of Plato. He's usually the first person you'd study on a formal philosophy course. But Diogenes absolutely despised Plato, and he despised the symposia, and he despised all the academics. So what Diogenes actually did one day, he skinned a chicken, he pulled all of its feathers off and skinned it, and he went into one of Plato's lectures, and he threw the chicken at him. A few days after he did this to Plato and was completely expelled from the university at the time, Alexander the Great, Alexander of Macedon, wanted to come and speak to Diogenes. And Diogenes was the only person who was ever kind of offended Alexander, who at the time was a great conqueror, because Alexander had stepped in front of his sunlight and put a shadow on him. And Diogenes wasn't happy about that because he was sunbathing. So Diogenes told Alexander to get out of his way because he wanted to sunbathe in the sun. And he's probably the only man in history who's ever said that to Alexander of Macedon without being on the end of a sword. But Diogenes was one of those characters who looked at Athenian society and just thought, I just can't be bothered with this. This isn't the society for me. I want a better world. And that was the kind of philosophy he talked about. So it kind of does key into what Pete said, that this is ancient. This isn't about now. This has been going on for thousands of years. This is always this tension between this top-down model of society and this idea of what people do. It's just all about people coming together. So I'll finish it, I'll bring everything full circle, where I open with my broken heart, and we'll close with some unity by talking about love, which anybody who knows me will probably be quite wondering why I'm talking about love, because I'm the last person on earth to talk about love. But the love I mean is the love that we have for one another, and that's all about this connection between people. So this isn't soppy, kind of little fluffy puppies love. This is the connection that you have to the world. Because if you remove everything else from the world, this is all we have. We have the love that we have for one another, the love that we have for our community, for our environment, and for our planet. So rather than storming the ramparts, and rather than trying to overthrow the governments and do all these kinds of things, all we need to do is learn to love ourselves again. That's all we need to do. Stop loving money, stop loving what we might buy, what we might have, whether we can get the latest iPad, because that's really irrelevant. The only one simple principle that we need is to learn to love one another again. And hopefully that's what COOCs will do. Because if each of us takes the thing that we love the most, the thing that we think about when we get up in the morning, and we share that with somebody else, and we create that dialogue with somebody else, then we change somebody's life. And hopefully, even though this is our tiny little town, if we change this little town, then we have in a small part changed the world. And to me, that's revolution, really. And that's what COOCs is all about. And this is me. If you ever want to contact me, then feel free to get in touch. And hopefully the philosophy course will be online in the next few weeks, hopefully, so just watch this space. So thank you, that's me.